Oh boy, we're getting at the tipping point of the story. This is where shit gets real. I love the bickering between Marion and Indy. This is after Belloc and the Germans find them and steal the Ark and leave them in the snake-infested chamber. I skipped the part where Belloc was trying to charm Marion, but I'll get back to it much later for a completely different reason in a different video. Indy and Marion escape the Well of the Souls, which is pretty funny because they end up right next to a Nazi camp. And so it's like, hey, the Ark was right there behind that wall. Fun fact, there was going to be a short gag where Indy punches out an Arab once he gets out. Spielberg decided to cut it, but you can still see a guy passed out right here because that was right after Indy supposedly punched him. I love this fight scene so much between Indy and the big Nazi guy. What I like about this, and the Indy movies in general, is that Indy and the bad guys don't have sparkling rows of abs or even toned muscles. This type of fighting is less about style and more about function, if you understand what I mean. This Nazi guy is the kind of guy you'd see chopping wood for his log cabin. Nothing about him is obnoxious per se. It's more like, whoa, okay, that guy's serious. And that's the kind of guy that you would see in the real world if you picked the wrong fight. Indy has this smart-ass, dirty quality to his fighting when facing this monster, as seen here. In many action movies, when the hero faces someone bigger than them, they must resort to wits and foul play rather than brute strength. At the end of the day, though, it's all part of natural survival. This is really the first taste we get of the Nazis in full force. We hear John Williams' motif for the Nazis for the first time when Marion sees the soldiers coming. So Indy rescues Marion again. The whole place is blowing up. They reunite with Sala, and then begins the greatest action sequence ever. I seriously think this may be the greatest action sequence. I fucking love it. Indy goes off on horseback chasing after the Nazis with the Ark. Some people wonder why the Arabs here are cheering Indy on, cause what do they know what's going on? But first of all, it's a dramatic effect. Yeah, the Arabs here act as the audience. But it's not out of the question to say that they realize that Indy was the one who found the Ark and is against the Nazis. John Williams' track for this chase scene, aptly called Desert Chase, is a nice and hefty 7 minutes and 33 seconds long. It's absolutely brilliant, and to this day is my favorite movie score track. Now let me tell you two big reasons why I love this scene so much. Number one, it's real. This is really the biggest reason. Honestly, you don't see action sequences like these anymore. I always thought that there should be an Oscar for Best Stunt, and in turn, that would motivate filmmakers to create more realistic stunts. With the exception of these losers falling over a cliff, everything here is real. People really climbed a moving truck. Someone actually did this under a moving truck in real life. I should give credit to the legendary Vic Armstrong. You may have seen his name in a lot of credits in a lot of movies. That's because he's currently the world's most prolific stunt double. But even fucking Harrison Ford did this part, and he broke ribs doing it. Fucking Banff. 2. The action flows. This type of action sequence is, and I'm going to sound weird using this word, but beautiful. It's fucking beautiful. It follows a series of logical events. Action sequences today are all about cutting and not savoring the action, so it all feels like a blur. This scene gives you just enough time to savor every moment. Indy gets on the truck, Indy takes out the driver, the soldiers try to take him out together. Then there's a rule at play here that I notice in a lot of good chase sequences like this. There's always going to be an enemy who injures the hero but still fails. Then near the end of the chase, the last enemy left, who happens to be the most skillful, tries to take down the hero, and it's like a boss fight in a video game, like saving the best for last kind of thing. The Nazi who shot Indy still affects the action when later on the last Nazi notices Indy's gunshot wound and uses it to his advantage. The last Nazi here throws Indy out of the truck. And then of course Indy works his way around and does the same exact thing to the last Nazi, except this guy is nowhere as awesome as Indy and he fails miserably. This is all about antithesis. How does the hero trump the enemies? What is it about the hero that makes him or her better? In this case, it was really Indy's whip. His signature weapon got him out of this mess. So Indy now has the Ark. He and Marion say goodbye to Sala and return to the grand old USA. Here's one of my favorite romantic moments, and it's ironic in that it's not romantic at all, but it's still cute and funny. This scene parodies previous adventure action flicks where the guy makes out with a girl after the big action sequence and male dominance wins the day, blah blah blah. It's turned around here in the sense that it's the woman who initiates the romance. She wants the D. John Williams' romantic cue for Marion reaches its peak, and then it stops as Indy falls asleep. It's assumed, though, that Indy and Marion probably had sex. Probably. Maybe. You can think what you want. Maybe they just cuddled. But you know what's the one thing I noticed here? Now, this is getting Freudian, but filmmakers do like to create visual cues like this. Instead of outright showing or even implying sexual acts because the filmmakers want to garner a wider audience for their film, they use really subtle visual cues, almost like subliminal messages. In this shot, you see Marion still sleeping with the covers over her. We later know that she's most likely naked because she takes her dress down from behind her. Indy, meanwhile, is cocking his pistol right in front of the camera, and then even sticks the pistol in his crotch. It may seem totally out there at first to suggest the direction here implied they had sex, but I argue that it's really not. It's a really easy metaphor. Gun needs to be reloaded. Gun, penis, male ego. Come on. There have been old films where the male and female character are about to have sex on a train, and then the movie cuts to the train entering a tunnel, which is symbolical for what happens next. Oh yeah, sexy time. Nazis storm the boat. Nazis take the Ark. Indy does some awesome shit again by getting on a Nazi sub, and then we get into the final stretch of the movie. I can finish this video in an adequate amount of time, right? Yeah, come on, let's keep going. One final note before the climax is that, again, Belloc gets to Indy's head. Indy is at his last straw here. He threatens to blow up the Ark if they don't release Marion, but Belloc knows Indy by now. He knows the Ark is too valuable to blow up. Indy has come so far for this. He can't put himself to do it. The climax is a grisly and classic scene. Belloc and the Nazis open the Ark, and at first there's nothing, but then these ghosts come out and they're all amazed by everything. I actually have a theory that the ghosts are all the dead people who opened the Ark. Indy then tells Marion not to look at whatever's coming out of the Ark. Now, I admit that this is one tidbit that puts a slight flaw in the overall movie. You see, originally, the script had two rules for the Ark. Never touch it, and never look at what's inside of it. These rules were spoken by the Osama bin Laden looking guy. You know, this guy. Ultimately, these rules were cut from the film. But notice that throughout the entire movie, nobody actually touches the Ark until the very end. Indy and Sala use poles to lift the Ark and carry it. This is all because the filmmakers had those two rules in mind when they were filming. Now, why did they cut this out? Probably because Indy wasn't really following rules throughout most of the movie. By now we know that Indy is this smart-ass, borderline anti-hero. He wants things. Listening to a couple rules about not touching the Ark would feel a little out of character for him. But then at the very end, Indy finally gives in to believing in the powers of the Ark. So I see this in different ways. You could say Indy just knows shit, you know? He's a professor at a school and spends his career teaching not just archaeology, but also knowledgeable in mythology. Also remember that he said he went to Sunday school when he was showing the Bible to Marcus and the government agents. He would have heard the stories of the Ark in the Bible where the enemies of God touched or looked into the Ark and died, as mentioned in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. However, in the direction, you can tell what Indy is thinking through his expressions. After the bad guys open the Ark and find nothing, you see Indy go from suspenseful to full of relief. He's like, there was nothing in there all along. Then, when the electronics start freaking out, he's like, oh shit, something's really happening. This made him fearful of even watching what was about to happen. And even if he didn't know the rules, we all pretty much know that it's never a good idea to look into the face of God, because you're pretty much just dead at that point. Ultimately, fear was what saved Indy and Marion. Fear and respect for unknown powers, which is what Sala alluded to in an earlier scene by suggesting that the Ark shouldn't be disturbed. And finally, we have the wrap-up. In just a few minutes, we warp to Washington, D.C., where the government agents mysteriously take hold of the Ark, much to Indy and Marcus's dismay. This ending scene with Indy and Marion is cute, but it also annoys me because of the setting. Now, this setting always bothered me because I've been all around DC throughout vacations as a kid, and I never once recognized this place. Then I saw the movie Dirty Harry, which was 100% filmed on location in San Francisco, and I immediately recognized the building that Indy and Marion were in at the end of Raiders. It was San Francisco City Hall. Dirty Harry is a totally different species of a movie that I can go on and on about in another series of episodes, but I do love that they filmed everything on location. It kind of annoys me that Raiders tries to pull off San Francisco as DC. It's trivial and I understand why they did it. You're not going to fly over across country to film a 2-minute sequence. That still costs time and money. And before you mention it, this shot here of DC is actually not filmed by the people who made Raiders. This was just some stock footage they stole from something else to establish that Indy is now in DC. And you can actually tell if you inspect the quality of the shot because it's rather out of place compared to how the rest of the film looks. But, regardless, I'm just subtly annoyed. I like to have movies filmed where they say they are. Fantasy and sci-fi is a different story, of course. And other times you need to build a set to film a place that doesn't exist, but you still want to play it off as being in a certain part of the world, which is totally fine. But I don't like it when they say, hey, we're over here, when they actually filmed over there. Because it just breaks the illusion. How else could they have done it? Easy. They could have had this conversation in the school that Indy teaches in. But whatever, it's a nice looking place anyway. At last, here's the final scene. This scene has been parodied and referenced in subsequent films and TV shows. It's great because it adds mystery to what else is out there in the world. What else is still out there, waiting to be raided by Indiana Jones?